The Lakota's greatest victory became their final defeat, Battle of Little Bighorn. They defeated Custer, but it wasn't his last stand. It was theirs. The Plains Indians united in numbers, never seen before, to take down the U.S. Army at Little Bighorn. But what followed wasn't freedom, it was destruction. What went so terribly wrong after their greatest victory? Watch to find out. Don't miss more powerful history. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air above the greasy grass. 758 abandoned U.S. Army carbines lay scattered across the battlefield. Blood stained the summer grass, where Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and 267 men of the 7th Cavalry had fallen. Not since Europeans first set foot on North American soil had Native Americans achieved such a decisive victory against U.S. military forces. June 25, 1876. The Battle of Little Bighorn had ended. For the combined forces of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, numbering over 1,800 fighters, their moment of triumph had arrived. Never before had such a massive gathering of Plains tribes united in common purpose. Warriors from at least 5 Lakota bands, Hunkpapa, Oglala, Minneconjou, Sansark, and Blackfeet, fought alongside their Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho allies. Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa holy man, whose visions had foretold this victory, walked among the celebrating warriors. His prophecy had come true, soldiers falling into camp like grasshoppers from the sky. But as he observed the celebrations, a shadow crossed his weathered face. He murmured to those nearby that they had won nothing, that more soldiers would come, more than could be counted. The victory that summer day was total. Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen, commanding the surviving elements of the 7th Cavalry, had retreated to defensive positions miles away. The combined native force could have pursued and annihilated them as well, but chose instead to celebrate their triumph and honor their own fallen warriors. Within days of the battle, however, the massive encampment began to dissolve. The alliance that had seemed unstoppable started to fracture along tribal lines. As warriors began packing their tippies, Crazy Horse and 2 Moons, a Northern Cheyenne chief, discussed their people's diverging paths. 2 Moons people would head for the Powder River country, where hunting grounds near Bear Butte still had some buffalo. Crazy Horse's band would move toward the Little Missouri, as their scouts reported army columns approaching from 3 directions. This separation was not simply a tactical decision, it was a necessity born of ecological reality. The great buffalo herds that once blackened the plains with their numbers had been decimated by white hunters. The combined native encampment of approximately 8,000 people required enormous resources to sustain itself. The 15,000 horses they possessed quickly depleted the grass surrounding their camps. Food stores dwindled. Hunting parties ranged farther each day, returning with less game. Within weeks, what had been the largest gathering of Plains Indians in recorded history splintered into smaller bands. The Northern Cheyenne, under 2 Moons and Little Wolf, moved toward the Powder River. Sitting Bull led his Hunkpapa Lakota north toward the Yellowstone. Crazy Horse and his Oglala warriors drifted toward the Little Missouri River. The Minneconjou, Sansark, and other bands likewise dispersed in different directions. General Philip Sheridan, commander of the Military Division of the Missouri, received the news of Custer's defeat with cold calculation. He immediately dispatched additional columns under Generals Alfred Terry, George Crook, and John Gibbon to converge on the region. More than 2,500 fresh troops poured into the northern plains. In his correspondence to General William Sherman, Sheridan vowed to make an example of them, insisting this defeat must be avenged with overwhelming force. What the native leaders failed to recognize in their moment of triumph was the bitter irony of their situation. Little Bighorn was not Custer's last stand, it was theirs. The very victory that seemed to promise freedom instead ensured their destruction. United, they had achieved the impossible. Divided, they faced a military machine awakened to full fury. In Washington, D.C., news of the disaster galvanized public opinion and Congress. Previously reluctant to fund expensive Indian campaigns, lawmakers now approved unlimited resources to solve the Indian problem once and for all. The railroads, pressing westward, demanded security. Mining interests in the Black Hills required protection. The American public, shocked by Custer's defeat, demanded vengeance. As autumn approached, the scattered bands found themselves hunted across the northern plains. Their greatest victory had unleashed their greatest nightmare. News of Custer's defeat thundered through American society like a prairie storm. Newspapers across the nation printed lurid accounts of savage butchery and barbaric mutilation. The military disaster at Little Bighorn represented more than the loss of 267 soldiers. It was a symbolic humiliation that struck at the heart of America's manifest destiny. Politicians demanded action. Citizens called for vengeance. The image of the slain Custer, with his flowing golden locks, became an icon of martyrdom that galvanized the nation. In Washington, General William Tecumseh Sherman stood before a gathering of reporters, his eyes cold with determination. He declared that they would hunt down the Indians and corral them on reservations, or exterminate them if necessary. His fist pounded the podium as he made clear where the government now stood. Sherman and General Philip Sheridan wasted no time. They appeared before Congress with demands that would fundamentally reshape the government's Indian policy. The generals requested an expanded army, additional forts throughout unceded Indian territory, and most significantly military control over the Indian agencies that had previously been under civilian authority. Congress, riding the wave of public outrage, granted nearly everything. Military appropriations increased by 27%. The Red Cloud and Spotted Tail agencies, the administrative centers for managing relations with the largest Lakota bands, were transferred to military control. 2,500 additional troops were deployed to the northern plains, including special volunteer units who called themselves Custer Avengers. Hundreds of Crow, Shoshone, Arikara, and Pawnee scouts, longtime rivals of the Lakota, were recruited to track the scattered bands across the vast territory. Find them, Sheridan ordered his commanders. Pursue them in winter. Attack their villages when the snow is deep and their ponies are weak. Take their horses. Burn their lodges. Destroy their food supplies. Give them no rest. Previous treaties, agreements, and diplomatic protocols were effectively suspended. The military received unprecedented authority to conduct operations throughout the region with minimal civilian oversight. In the Oval Office, President Ulysses S. Grant signed a new directive that fundamentally altered the relationship between the federal government and the Plains tribes. The order increased food rations for Native people on reservations, a seeming act of generosity that masked a brutal ultimatum. To receive these rations, tribes would be required to permanently relinquish all hunting rights and surrender claims to any territory outside reservation boundaries, including the sacred Black Hills. Grant's policy represented a stark acknowledgement of ecological reality. The great buffalo herds, the economic and spiritual foundation of Plains Indian life, had been reduced from millions to scattered remnants. Government officials calculated that without access to this traditional food source, Native resistance would inevitably collapse. The buffalo is gone, an Interior Department official bluntly informed a delegation of chiefs. That way of life is finished. You will rely on us now completely. No more roaming. No more hunting. Those days are over. When Spotted Tail, a powerful Brule Lakota leader, heard these terms, he rose from his seat, trembling with indignation. He challenged the government commissioners about their repeated blackmail tactics, how every time the Lakota refused to sign, They were threatened with starvation. "Does your great father in Washington know this is how you treat us?" he asked bitterly. Despite his impassioned criticism, Spotted Tail eventually signed the agreement. The choice was stark. Resistance meant starvation for his people. With his signature, 1/3 of the Great Sioux Reservation, including the mineral-rich Black Hills, was surrendered to the United States. The military strategy extended beyond territorial conquest to political manipulation within tribal governance. In a calculated move to exploit internal divisions, Army officials deposed Red Cloud from his position as head chief and elevated Spotted Tail to the role. Red Cloud, who had previously traveled to Washington and witnessed firsthand the vast resources of American power, had advocated for a pragmatic approach to survival. Now his influence was deliberately undermined, creating deeper fissures within Lakota leadership. This divide-and-conquer approach yielded immediate results. Native people living on reservations, many of whom had fought alongside Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull at Little Bighorn just months earlier, began enlisting as scouts and auxiliaries for the U.S. Army. Government recruiters offered compelling incentives: regular food supplies, retention of weapons, protection for families, and monetary payment. A young warrior questioned an older Lakota scout about fighting for white soldiers against his own people. The scout adjusted his U.S. Army coat and checked his Winchester rifle before answering quietly about the coming winter, his hungry children, and his grim understanding of what happened to those who resisted too long. By early autumn of 1876, more than 400 Lakota and Cheyenne men had joined Army units, pursuing the hostile bands led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. These indigenous scouts, with their intimate knowledge of the landscape, tracking skills, and understanding of their opponent's tactics, would prove instrumental in the brutal campaign that followed. The U.S. government had engineered a devastating carrot-and-stick policy. For those who submitted to reservation life and surrendered their lands and autonomy, there would be food, shelter, and survival. For those who continued to resist, there would be relentless pursuit through the coming winter, a season that would prove the harshest in living memory. As autumn gave way to winter in 1876, General Sheridan deployed his ace commander to the northern plains. Colonel Nelson A. Miles, disciplined, ambitious, and tactically brilliant, received orders to pursue Sitting Bull's band no matter the cost or conditions. Unlike the flamboyant Custer, Miles was a methodical military professional with superior resources and intelligence. Miles commanded the 5th Infantry, equipped with the latest Springfield rifles and newly designed winter gear. Their supply lines were secured by a network of forts strategically positioned throughout the region. While Custer had ridden to disaster with a single regiment, Miles coordinated multiple columns that communicated via telegraph and heliograph signals. Through November's first snows, Miles pushed his men relentlessly across the windswept plains. Lakota scouts in his employ tracked Sitting Bull's band to the valley of the Yellowstone River. On December 18, 1876, Miles's scouts located Sitting Bull's winter camp. Rather than attacking immediately, Miles requested a parley. The two leaders met on neutral ground between their forces. Steam rose from their breath in the frigid air as they sized each other up. Miles, ramrod straight in his blue uniform with polished brass buttons, explained the government's position clearly. The old ways were finished. Sitting Bull must bring his people to the reservation. Resistance would mean starvation and death. Sitting Bull, dressed in a buffalo robe with eagle feathers in his hair, listened impassively. When Miles finished, the Hunkpapa leader's response cut through the frigid air with cold fury. He spoke of broken promises and the impossibility of living as an agency Indian. God Almighty made him an Indian, he declared, not an agency Indian begging for government rations. The meeting ended abruptly. Shots were exchanged between nervous warriors and soldiers. Though no one was killed, the brief skirmish revealed a telling truth. Many of Sitting Bull's followers lacked the will to continue fighting. Nearly 40 Lakota slipped away that night to surrender to Miles. 2 weeks later, another 160 abandoned Sitting Bull to accept reservation life. While Miles pursued Sitting Bull toward the Canadian border, General George Crook hunted the Northern Cheyenne bands that had fought at Little Bighorn. Intelligence from reservation scouts led Crook to the village of Chief Dull Knife along the Powder River in what is now Wyoming. On November 25, Crook's forces attacked at dawn. The temperature stood at 30 degrees as soldiers stormed the sleeping village. The Cheyenne fought desperately, but were overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. By midday, 40 Cheyenne lay dead. The village of 173 lodges was destroyed. The material devastation went beyond the loss of shelter and food stores. Soldiers burned 500 buffalo robes, dozens of sacred medicine bundles, elaborate war bonnets, painted shields, and ceremonial drums. Generations of accumulated cultural knowledge, encoded in physical objects, was reduced to ash. The soldiers understood that destroying these items meant destroying the Cheyennes' ability to maintain their identity and spiritual practices. The surviving Cheyenne, including women and children, were force-marched 500 miles south to reservations in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Inadequately clothed and fed, nearly 50 died during the journey. Those who reached the reservation found little welcome from their Southern Cheyenne relatives, who viewed the newcomers as competitors for scarce resources. In a bitter twist of history, some of the same military leaders who prosecuted this ruthless campaign later became the most vocal critics of government Indian policy. General Crook spent his final years advocating for native rights and condemning the systematic corruption of the reservation system. General Sheridan, in an 1878 report, wrote bluntly, "We have occupied his country, taken away his lordly domain, destroyed his herds of game, penned him up on reservations, and reduced him to poverty. For humanity's sake, let us give him enough to eat and integrity in the agent over him." These belated calls for justice came too late for most Plains tribes, whose traditional way of life had been systematically dismantled. For Crazy Horse, the legendary Oglala war leader, the final surrender came after a profound spiritual crisis. In early March 1877, with his band reduced to near starvation after months of pursuit by Miles' forces, Crazy Horse and his wife left camp for a private vision quest in the wilderness. For 3 days, he fasted and prayed through blizzard conditions, seeking guidance from the spirits that had once provided him with powerful visions. No visions came. No guidance materialized. The spirits remained silent. When Crazy Horse returned to his people, haggard and withdrawn, he found that his lieutenants had reached a decision in his absence. Iron Hawk, once a fierce warrior, gestured toward the malnourished children in tattered clothing. "You see all the people here in rags," he said quietly. "We all need clothing. We might as well go in." Crazy Horse, the man whose name had once struck fear into the hearts of U.S. soldiers, simply nodded in resignation. The fighting spirit that had animated the greatest native resistance of the 19th century was broken not by military defeat, but by the systematic destruction of the ecological and cultural foundations of Plains Indian life. On May 6, 1877, Crazy Horse led 889 starving, exhausted Oglala into the Red Cloud Agency to surrender. The iconic warrior rode at the head of his people, thin and hollow-eyed, while thousands of reservation Indians and Army personnel gathered to witness the moment. Many wept openly at the sight of the once proud band reduced to such desperate circumstances. The great Allied force that had annihilated Custer's command at Little Bighorn less than a year earlier was now completely disbanded. Their stunning victory had accelerated their ultimate defeat. On May 6, 1877, Crazy Horse rode into Fort Robinson with 889 followers. The legendary warrior came under specific conditions that had been negotiated with military representatives. In exchange for surrender, he had been promised a separate reservation west of the Black Hills and permission for seasonal buffalo hunts. These were not unreasonable demands. They represented the minimum conditions under which Crazy Horse believed his people could maintain some semblance of their traditional way of life. General Crook, upon hearing these terms, nodded and promised to consult with authorities in Washington. Both men understood the reality. No such promises would be honored. The buffalo hunts had already been prohibited by official policy. The government's position was uncompromising. The Lakota would become farmers on designated reservations, or they would starve. For 112 days, Crazy Horse attempted to adjust to reservation life at the Red Cloud Agency. He lived in a canvas lodge at the edge of the settlement, keeping distance between himself and the agency buildings. Military officers who interacted with him during this period left conflicting accounts of his demeanor. Captain Bork noted that Crazy Horse appeared melancholy and dissatisfied. Lieutenant Clark observed that Crazy Horse is all right if people would just leave him alone and not buzz him so much. The attention focused on Crazy Horse created tension among other Lakota leaders. Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, who had accommodated themselves to reservation life years earlier, viewed the newcomer with suspicion. Warriors who had once followed Crazy Horse now curried favor with agency officials by spreading rumors about him. Whispers circulated that he planned to escape and resume fighting. The pressure intensified in August when military authorities recruited Lakota scouts for a campaign against the Nez Perce. During a meeting about this expedition, a critical mistranslation occurred that sealed Crazy Horse's fate. Frank Gruard, a half-French, half-Polynesian interpreter with a personal grudge against Crazy Horse, deliberately misconstrued his words. What Crazy Horse actually said was that he would join the expedition north and fight until all the whites, referring specifically to the French-speaking Nez Perce, were defeated. Gruard translated this as a threat to kill all white men. The statement was immediately reported to General Crook, who ordered Crazy Horse's arrest. Learning of the arrest order, Crazy Horse fled Fort Robinson on September 4, riding 40 miles to Camp Sheridan, where his uncle, Spotted Tail, served as head chief. Hundreds gathered to witness his arrival. The once mighty warrior, now haggard and desperate, approached his uncle publicly, explaining his trouble and asking for sanctuary at the agency. Spotted Tail, unwilling to challenge military authority, refused him before the assembled crowd. He coldly stated that they never had any trouble at his agency, that he was chief there, and that if Crazy Horse came, he would have to obey Spotted Tail's authority. Witnesses described how Crazy Horse physically wilted at this rejection. With nowhere else to turn, he agreed to return to Fort Robinson under escort of Lieutenant Jesse Lee, an officer who had shown him kindness. They arrived at Fort Robinson on September 5, 1877. Lieutenant Lee immediately sensed something wrong. The parade ground was filled with Red Cloud's warriors, some in war paint. Cavalry troops stood at attention, rifles ready. As they dismounted, Captain James Kennington approached, informing them that the post commander, Colonel Luther Bradley, would not meet with Crazy Horse that day. "I'll take charge of the prisoner now," Kennington stated. Lieutenant Lee, disturbed by this break in protocol, went to speak with Colonel Bradley directly. There he learned the truth. Orders had come directly from General Sheridan. Crazy Horse was to be transported to military headquarters in Chicago, then imprisoned at Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas, a remote island prison off the coast of Florida, a place where a man of the plains would be surrounded by water with no hope of escape. When Lee returned with this news, he found Crazy Horse being escorted toward the post guardhouse. Realizing he was being imprisoned, Crazy Horse attempted to break free from Kennington and Little Big Man, a former ally now working as a reservation policeman. In the struggle, Crazy Horse pulled a concealed knife and slashed Little Big Man's arm. "Stab the son of a bitch," Kennington shouted. Private William Gentles lunged forward with his bayonet, driving it into Crazy Horse's back. The blade pierced his kidney and lung. Crazy Horse screamed and collapsed. In the confusion that followed, Post Surgeon Valentine McGillicuddy pushed through the crowd to reach the wounded man. They carried Crazy Horse into the adjutant's office. McGillicuddy examined the wound and knew immediately it was fatal. When offered a cot, Crazy Horse refused, choosing instead to lie on the bare wooden floor. For several hours, he lingered, repeatedly murmuring, "I don't know why they stabbed me." As night fell, Crazy Horse spoke his final words to his father. "Touch the clouds. Tell the people it is no use to depend on me anymore now." He died around 11:00 p.m. on September 5, 1877. His father wrapped the body in a blanket and transported it by wagon to Spotted Tail Agency. There, following Lakota tradition, the body was placed on a scaffold in a remote area. The exact location has never been revealed by those who know it. The significance of Crazy Horse's death transcended the man himself. His refusal to lie on the government cot in his final hours represented a last act of sovereignty. By choosing the floor, he claimed the land, even the floor of an army office, as still belonging to his people. In death, as in life, he refused to submit completely. News of Crazy Horse's killing spread quickly across the plains. For many Lakota, it confirmed their deepest fears about surrender. If even Crazy Horse, the greatest warrior of his generation, could be betrayed and killed after laying down his weapons, what hope existed for others? Sitting Bull, upon hearing the news in Canada, where he had fled with his followers, observed grimly, "We are the last of the Lakota. When we are gone, there will be nothing left but stories." The Lakota resistance that had reached its zenith at Little Bighorn collapsed entirely in the wake of Crazy Horse's death. Within 5 years, nearly all Plains tribes had been confined to reservations. The buffalo herds were hunted to near extinction. The nomadic way of life that had defined Plains cultures for centuries vanished within a single generation. The tragic irony remains. The very victory that demonstrated native military prowess, the defeat of Custer at Little Bighorn, accelerated the destruction of Plains Indian society. What seemed like triumph became the catalyst for their downfall. Today, the story of Little Bighorn and its aftermath challenges us to look beyond simplified narratives of heroes and villains. It reveals complex truths about cultural collision, ecological devastation, and the human cost of conquest. It reminds us that history rarely follows a straight line of progress, but rather moves through cycles of violence, resistance, accommodation, and survival. The question that lingers after examining this pivotal moment in American history is not simply who won or lost a particular battle, but what values and visions of justice should guide our understanding of the past and our creation of the future. Don't miss more powerful history. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories now, as we uncover forgotten chapters of America's indigenous heritage with the depth and accuracy they deserve.